Well, if you've watched my last video, you'll see that I promised a 5 rig tips video, so here it is. This isn't your normal sort of rig tips where, you know, check your hooks are sharp and that sort of thing, the ones that you've heard a million times before. Hopefully there's a couple of tips here which you won't have seen very often, if at all. Little edges that I like to put into my rigs to make sure they work as effectively as possible. So without further ado, let's get into the video. Tip number 1 is to always steam your rigs if you're using stiff or semi-stiff materials. It's no good steaming supple braid, it won't make a difference, but anything that's got a bit of rigidity to it, if you steam it, it'll go nice and straight and it'll actually be a little bit stiffer to help it kick away from the lead on the cast, or if you're using foam nuggets, you know, as it drops it'll kick away from the lead, and also it makes it harder for the fish to deal with. So yeah, any sort of semi-stiff or stiff materials, always steam them. Tip number 2 is to angle your shrink tube if you're using a kicker on your bottom bait rigs. What I mean by that is when you cut it off the stick of shrink tube, cut it at a slight angle. I believe that this helps the hook turn and also gives a bit of a point to the end of the tubing, so that when the fish tries to blow it out, it might catch on the top lip as it's blowing it out and help the hook to bed down in the bottom lip. So tip 2 is cut your shrink tube at an angle. Tip number 3 is to leave a long loop at the end of your rigs. When you attach your rigs to a quick link, as I do, make the loop at least sort of 2 to 3 inches, and when you steam it, this section goes really stiff and it gives you a nice little boom to kick the rig away from the lead when you're casting. And also I put a bit of putty in the middle of the rig, which helps this to you know, fall down when the rig's dropping through the water, and it just kicks it away that little bit. So tip number 3 is to leave a long loop at the end of your rig. Tip number 4 is a little bit tricky to explain, but what I do is, when I use coated materials like the ESP strip tees that I use a lot, you strip away the section where you're going to tie your hook onto to leave a supple section, but quite often that supple material is quite tightly woven. So what I do is I rub it between my fingers like that, and it just loosens those fibres and gives the hook link near the hook a lot more flexibility and suppleness, so that when the fish sucks it in, there's absolutely no unnatural resistance and they can take it from any angle and it can lift up easily into their mouth. But also it gives the hook and the hook bait good separation so that they can move independently of each other, and also when the hook bait is picked up, the hook will naturally drop down under its own weight, because the flexibility of the rig, the suppleness of the rig, is a lot better to allow the hook that natural free movement. So tip number 4 is to rub the hook link nearest the hook. Okay. Lastly, tip number 5 is to check your hook holds. Every time you catch a fish, before you take the hook out, see where the hook has entered the fish's lip, and this will let you know how your rig is performing. If it's hooked too near the edge of the lip, that means your rig's potentially too short, and if it's hooked too far back, that could mean that your rig's too long. And also it gives you an idea about which direction the fish picked up the bait and turned after it had been hooked. So, you know, it can give you an idea of the fish's behaviour on your lake and help you sort of narrow down some of the more elusive residents. So yeah, tip number 5, check your hook holds. Thanks for watching.